G'day legends, TJC Sports here. Welcome back to another legendary NRL Round predictions video. Today, we're going to be doing a round for last week. I got 4 out of 8. Not the perfect week, but hopefully we can build on it this. If you enjoy, consider hitting that like button and subscribing, as well as hitting that little notification bell to be notified of every time we upload. With all of that out of the way, let's get on with it. These are the NRL Round 4 predictions. We open up with the South Sydney Rabbitohs versus the Penrith Panthers. Both teams coming off a loss, South Sydney Rabbitohs being demolished by the Sharks, and Panthers putting up a decent fight against the favourites for the premiership this year in my eyes, the Melbourne Storm, without Nathan Cleary as well. Honestly, and Edwards, they were missing a couple and still look really good. There was a lot of questions around the Bunnies' good start, with the fact that they were only by a few points against teams lower on the end of the table, or expected to be lower on the end of the table. And it was kind of proven when they took on a big gun like the Cronulla Sharks and were tossed around. Unfortunately for South Sydney, I don't think they're going to win this one. I would love to see them pull off one of those magical upsets you talk about, but I think the Penrith Panthers got this 13+ legends. On to the next one. Moving on over to our Friday games, we have the Sydney Roosters versus the Gold Coast Titans. Titans coming off a solid win over the Newcastle Knights, and the Sydney Roosters coming off what was a really, in my opinion, bland game against the New Zealand Warriors. But they really easily could have won that. They only lost in the dying moments. There's definitely some key outs in this one, with Connor Watson unable to return to the Roosters this week after coming off early last week. And the Gold Coast Titans are without Keanu Kinney. Jalen de Groot is lining up at fullback for them. I honestly don't blame anyone for who they tip in this game, as I think this one is one of the key ones that could go either way here. This is just one of those games where it's a flip of the coin of who you could go with. I am going to lean towards the Sydney Roosters here, legends, 1-12, but I wouldn't be shocked if the Titans got up in this. On to the Battle of Brisbane to finish off our Friday night footy. That's right, it's the Dolphins versus the Broncos. Dolphins coming off 3 straight losses. To be fair, though, they were unlucky to win last week, losing to an incredible comeback by the West Tigers in the second half. As for their visitors, the Broncos, they're coming off a great bounce-back win over the Cowboys in their 2015 10-year grand final rematch there. The Cowboys put up a decent fight, but in the end, the Broncos ended up getting that one quite comfortably. In terms of ins and outs, the Dolphins don't really have any real ins and outs that are going to be going into the starting lineup, though I feel like maybe they want to make some changes if they continue to lose for the next few rounds. As for the Broncos, they have a huge return, with Katoni Staggs returning to the centres. Considering the Dolphins' low hype compared to the Broncos, you'd probably expect me to go with the Broncos 13+. However, I'm going to go a little different here. I will say the Broncos will still win, but I'm going to say it's going to be 1-12. Dolphins to lift up for this one. And then it's Super Saturday. We have the Dragons versus the Melbourne Storm. The St. George Illawarra Dragons unable to get a win yet this year. The Storm unable to get a loss this year just yet here, heading into this one. Notable ins for the sides include for the Dragons, Dylan Egan and David Clemmer, who will be playing his first game for the Dragons since leaving the West Tigers. And for the Storm, they have Will Warbrick back, as well as entering their interchange, Lazarus Valepu. Apologies if I butchered that. Storm are also the injury-impacted team this game, with Jerome Hughes ruled out for the Melbourne Storm. Jerome Hughes, Nelson Asafa-Solomona, and Nick Meaney all ruled out for the Melbourne Storm. So obviously between the two teams, Melbourne Storm are much more weakened. However, I still think there'll be too much for the Dragons to handle, and I'll be going with the Melbourne Storm 13+. Then it's on to our middle game of Super Saturday, the North Queensland Cowboys versus the Canberra Raiders. Will the Milk come out on top over the Cowboys, who were quite impressive, surprisingly, last week, despite what was overall a good win for the Broncos? Or will it be spoilt? After what was, let's face it, a very disappointing game against the Maori Seagulls, I'll be honest, I couldn't quite believe that scoreline looking at it on my phone during waiting out the back for the Parra boys. They do have Joseph Tarpany back this week, though, so they can hope that that makes a difference. However, the Cowboys do have a good record against the Raiders at their own stadium, and did, as I said previously, show improvement against the Cowboys. However, that's not going to stop me. I am going with what is barely considered the upset here. It's pretty tight. The Canberra Raiders to win this 1-12 in a tight one. That's right. It's going to go against the stats, baby. And last but certainly not least, to wrap up our Super Saturday is Cronulla Sharks versus the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs. Both teams coming off wins. If I had to pick one that was probably the better result, though, it was probably the Cronulla Sharkies. Shout out to them. They had a terrific game against the South Sydney Rabbitohs, whereas the Bulldogs were always expected to beat my Parramatta Eels and should have smashed us based on what people were saying. However, they only just about managed to narrow themselves out a victory towards the end. I was very proud of my team after that one. As per injuries, obviously the Bulldogs are without a few players here. Burton, Kikau and Carraz all not there, as well as the Cronulla Sharkies who have lost Braden Hamlin-Uele. Based on what I've seen, I believe defence will play a huge factor in this game. I'll take the Cronulla Sharks 1-12 in this one, but I will not be shocked if the Bulldogs do get up for it. On to the first game of Sunday, we have the Manly Warringah Seagulls taking on my mighty Parramatta Eels. Yes, I know, we've lost all our games this year. I'm still calling us mighty. Deal with it. I'm such a rebel. Manly coming off a very impressive win over the Canberra Raiders, and the Parramatta Eels, unfortunately, unable to be clinical enough against the Bulldogs, who won in the end. It was our best game of the year, though, even though it does mean that we've lost 3 straight games. I'm not going to lie, even as an Eels supporter, this game looks hard to tip in Parra's favour, right? Tommy Turbo and Nathan Brown coming back into the side for the Manly Warringah Seagulls this week. Parramatta Eels get Sean Russell being moved back in. Jordan Samrani goes out of the side. And, of course, we also have Dan Keir coming in onto the bench. I'm also interested to see how Jack Williams goes, having been moved to prop for this game. Similar to what I said last week, and I'll say it again this week, I'll be going with the Parramatta Eels at 1-12 in this one, purely based on supporting my team. However, I will say that I reckon that Manly probably win this one. Well, legends, for those of you who are obviously not Parra supporters like myself. Enjoy Cherry Evans while you still can, Manly. Last, but certainly not least, finishing off round 4, it is the Tigers versus the Warriors. Both sides lucky enough to have the fortune to be able to say that they are coming off a win. West Tigers, what a comeback it was against the Dolphins to get that victory. I seriously could not believe my eyes watching it. And the Warriors also, while it wasn't as good of a game, even close to it, did manage to get their way over the Roosters there on their home field. They go away now, though, against the Tigers, and this one could be tough for them. In terms of ins and outs, the only in I can see is Rocco Berry coming back for the Warriors. Should be a great one for them. Rocco Berry is a solid and I think slightly underrated centre there for the Warriors. And as per outs, there are none for the West Tigers. But for the Warriors, there are actually, well, it only says 1 at the moment on the NRL app. There are 2. Roger Tuivasa-Sheck obviously ruled out with injury. And while he was named in the initial lineup, Dylan Walker will also be out as he has been released effective immediately to join my Parramatta Eels. So their side definitely has been impacted heading into this one. However, I do still rate their chances here in this game. Just unfortunately not enough to tip them. I'll be leaning towards the West Tigers in this one, and I'm going to say the Tigers win this 1-12 in a close one.